Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video and review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this video, all in all, shouldn't be that long. I believe it should only be about maybe 15 minutes long, 20 minutes long at most, but it's probably even going to be shorter than that. But, anyways, I just thought that I would talk about this because I thought that it was very particularly interesting. And anyways, this is going to be a conversation that I seen by the boxing channel known as the I.B.F.P. And of course, a certain amount of you probably know this boxing channel. A certain amount of people certainly have recommended that I review some of his videos. And, every once in a while when I see a video that I think all in all makes for an interesting conversation, I certainly do enjoy reviewing this man's channel. Because I do find him a certain amount more logical and objective, certainly than some of the other channels that I see out there. That doesn't mean that I always necessarily agree with what he has to say. But at the end of the day, I certainly agree with him more, and I certainly would recommend his channel compared to a lot of the other channels that I see out there, such as Boxing Ego, Dante's Boxing Nation, Aki TV. You basically overall, you know what I'm getting at. Pretty much any of these LDBC or new media channels. It just is what it is. And there's other channels that maybe I could bring up as well that maybe not be, involved with them, but I just don't know any at the current moment in time. But anyways, the reason why this video I thought was very important, the reason why I thought it would make an interesting conversation is because this is yet again going to be another conversation about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And once again, a lot of people, they may come to my channel and they may say, you know what, you talk so much about Saul Canelo Alvarez. Why do you talk so much about Saul Canelo Alvarez? Because Canelo Alvarez, in my view, is the clear number one pound for pound fighter in all of boxing. And when you're looked at as overall pretty much as the consensus number one pound for pound fighter in all of boxing by most lists and most people, especially in the sport of boxing, you're going to have a certain amount of people that love you. You're also going to have a certain amount of people that hate you. So basically, what does that mean? There's going to be a certain amount of people that, they accommodate you or, basically all in all, they may give you compliments and praise. There's also going to be a lot more people that may try to tear you down or overall may try to give you some sort of criticism. And not every person that gives a fighter criticism is a hater. For example, I'll know in this video we're going to be talking about, I believe, a former boxing champion or a former professional boxer by the name of Ray Boom Boom Mancini. And something that he said as of recent was very, very particularly interesting. Whether it was in an interview or maybe something that he posted, I'm not necessarily sure. But Ray Boom Boom Mancini, who I believe now is a boxing commentator, he said that he believes that not only will Canelo Alvarez lose to that of DMITRY BIVOL, but that he also believes that he will lose to David Benavidez. And his reason apparently for saying that is because he believes all in all that Canelo Alvarez is going to have a very big problem with DMITRY Bivol's movement, since in the past he has had problems with, certain fighters that can move extraordinarily well. And I get his point to a degree, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. But I do think all in all that it also is important to talk about how, in my view, Canelo Alvarez has changed as a fighter. Also in this video, we're going to be talking about, in my view, how big of a fight this is. This really isn't even just a big fight. It's not even just a good or great fight. This is a colossal fight. I don't think a lot of people really truly realize how big of a fight this is. You're going to see certain boxing channels that say, oh, here Canelo Alvarez goes again, facing a European fighter or, facing a similar style, blah, blah, blah. Well, if this would have been like 20, 25 years ago, I would somewhat understand the argument. Because 20, 25 years ago, I don't think that boxing, when it came down to it, don't get me wrong, boxing has always been a very diverse sport. But at the end of the day, for whatever reason, a lot of the European fighters have really caught up overall with some of these other fighters that may be from the American style or Britain or, some of these other areas. I don't think that if you take a look at it 20, 25 years ago or somewhere around that time, hell, even possibly 15 years ago, that a lot of these Eastern European fighters or some of these European fighters, when it comes down to it, would be as dominant as they are. When you take a look at the top 10 pound for pound list, and if we're just ranking things logically and objectively, there's a lot of European fighters. There's potentially 5 or 6 European fighters that you actually, or Caucasoid fighters anyway, that you actually could potentially put on your top 10 pound for pound list when it comes down to it. One of those fighters, of course, being Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. Now, of course, he is of Mexican descent. He was born in, I believe, Jalisco, Mexico. But, of course, he is looked at as a Caucasoid fighter by many people, or at least, having partial Caucasoid traits when it comes down to it. So, if you wanted to overall go that route, you could say that Canelo Alvarez is on the top 10 pound for pound list. But even if you didn't want to bring up him, because he's from Mexico, and maybe you'll know that that was his training system. Even if you want to bring up other European fighters, take a look at how many elite European fighters there are today. You have Tyson Fury. Now, of course, he's from Britain, and, they've always somewhat been, somewhat in the mix, but Tyson Fury is the best heavyweight in the world today. Not a lot of people would have predicted that 10 years ago. When you take a look at Josh Taylor, he's the best 140 pounder in the world at the current moment in time. And that's not even bringing up other fighters like a Vasily Lomachenko or, someone overall like an Alexander Usyk. When it came down to it, someone like an Artur Beterbiev, a DMITRY Bivol, when it comes down to it, a Gennady Triple-G Golovkin, which some people, of course, have told me overall that that's mainly an Asian country. I believe that it's on the border of both. But, overall, my point. Some of these countries, all in all, that were part of the former USSR, or some of these Eastern European countries when it comes down, or some of these countries that are along that border, there's a lot of very dominant fighters from those areas and highly skilled fighters from those areas. So at the end of the day, yes, we can say that, well, Canelo, he's facing a lot of these European fighters. A lot of these European fighters are very highly touted and very highly skilled. So at the end of the day, this DMITRY Bivol and Canelo Alvarez fight, very, very highly competitive. When it comes down to a very, very highly competitive, excellent match. Really probably one of the only fights out there that I see for Canelo that could potentially be a true 50-50 matchup. And we're going to talk about Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez here in a bit. But anyways, we're going to see overall what Mr. Ray Boom Boom Mancini had to say. We're also going to see what the I.B.F.P has to say. Let's get into it.
Canelo Alvarez loses to Benavidez and Bivol because he has problems with guys who can move? Look, let's break it down honestly and objectively as possible. And Ray Boom Boom Mancini, former world champion, has come out and stated that he believes DMITRY Bivol will beat Canelo Alvarez in his next fight. And he believes any potential matchup with David Benavidez will beat Canelo Alvarez simply because they can move. And Canelo Alvarez has always had problems with fighters who can move. Great footwork, a lot of movement. This is what he's saying, and
That's a very interesting statement because, and I've heard certain, narratives, or I'm not going to say narratives, but breakdowns that Ray Boom Boom Mancini has said in the past, and I haven't necessarily always agreed with what he says. I don't personally believe that he is the greatest breakdown artist. Now, of course, certain people may say, well, he was a former professional boxer, you're not. So, what basically do you have to say? Well, fair enough. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to, I know an elite fighter when I see one. And I know a fighter that, in my view, all in all, has turned greater as a result, in some of his fights. And it's just very interesting because if you're going to use the narrative that Canelo Alvarez, that I believe that he's going to lose to such and such because he has problems with movements and footwork and blah, 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 I would maybe understand someone saying that they believe that he's going to lose to DMITRY Bivol, because that's just a style that DMITRY Bivol has. He's very quick and light on his feet. He's a person that loves to move in and out. He's a person that likes to keep his hands up a lot. I'm not going to say that he has necessarily a Canelo or Floyd Mayweather Jr. type of defense or anything, but, or Pernell Sweepy Whitaker defense, whatever the hell you want to compare it to. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, he has a very decent, solid defense. He likes to keep his hands up a lot. He doesn't get hit flush very often. So I could maybe understand Ray Boom Boom Mancini saying that about Mr. DMITRY Bivol, because I think that he's a very, very highly touted fighter. I believe that he's extraordinarily skilled. But David Benavidez, I've never really gotten too much. It's not that David Benavidez, in my view, can't move around. It's not like he can't move around at all. But when I take a look at David Benavidez, all David Benavidez pretty much reminds me of is he's pretty much a big bruiser. That's not me saying that he can't box. It's not me saying that he's not a decent fighter, but I don't really know what people see in David Benavidez really besides the size and, really his style that's really going to give Canelo Alvarez as much problems as what a lot of people are alleging. Personally, and I've been saying this now probably for the past year because a lot of people have been pushing for this fight. And don't get me wrong, I would love to see the fight. I think that it's a fantastic matchup. But I think it's a fantastic matchup in the same way that a Devin Haney versus George Kambosos is a fantastic matchup. Or I think it's a great matchup in the same way that, for those of you, of course, that watched the recent UFC fight card or something, the way Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal was a very decent matchup. It's a popular matchup, because both fighters are decently well known. But at the end of the day, if you actually were going to pick one fighter, you probably would have that fighter winning at least 3-1 when it came down to it, or at least a favorite over the other fighter, at least a good solid 3-1, maybe even a 5-1. And that's kind of the same way that I see David Benavidez. I don't think that he has great footwork. I don't think, all in all, that he has great movement. He certainly doesn't have great defense when it comes down to it. I don't even think that he has a great power. I really don't know what a lot of people truly see in David Benavidez that is going to beat Canelo. I think a lot of people just take a look at his size and, the way that he constantly puts pressure on people and they're saying, wow, he might do that to Canelo Alvarez. May I remind people that Canelo Alvarez has fought certain pressure fighters like a Gennady Golovkin in the past. Someone who had an extraordinary jab, someone all in all who had almost light heavyweight type of power when it came down to it. Now, David Benavidez is bigger in stature than what a Gennady Golovkin was, but I don't think that David Benavidez is anywhere near as skilled as what a Gennady Golovkin was. David Benavidez is able to be knocked down. I don't think that he has anywhere near as good of a chin or as good a power as what Gennady Golovkin had. I don't think that he's going to be able to back up Canelo anywhere near as much as what a lot of people are saying. I think that if David Benavidez goes in the ring against Canelo, I think all in all that more than likely he's going to try and back up Canelo, and I think he's going to feel his power. I think he's going to feel his counters, and I think he's going to start to say, wow, this dude punches a lot harder and is much more accurate and much more defensively responsible than what I once thought he was going to be. Wow, he's hurting me. And I think all in all that he's going to start backing up. And then I think pretty much that fight is going to start to look like Canelo versus Chavez Jr. all over again. But that's pretty much my prediction. I've been wrong on predictions before. We all get wrong on certain predictions before, but that's just personally the way that I see that fight going. Now, DMITRY Bivol, in my view, which once again is a colossal fight, that could end up a little bit different. Because Bivol is very light on his feet. He has way better footwork and way better movement than what a David Benavidez, in my view, has. He may even potentially have more power than what a David Benavidez has when it comes on it. And I know certain people will disagree because they'll say, oh, well, Bivol hasn't got a knockout in years and all sort of stuff. Yes, but there's been certain people that have sparred DMITRY Bivol, including David Benavidez, that have said he isn't a great puncher. So it's very clear that DMITRY Bivol, overall, that he is a very decent puncher when he needs to be. I've seen him overall back up certain fighters that are even very decent punchers themselves, like that of a Jean Pascal or someone like a Joe Smith Jr. So DMITRY Bivol can handle himself in there. That's why this fight is going to be very particularly interesting, because we're going to see if Canelo, even though I do believe that he has gotten better at adjusting to certain movements with fighters, can he not only handle DMITRY Bivol's foot speed and movement, can he also handle his size and power? So we're going to see all in all how that ends up, but it's going to be very interesting.
Zero sense to me, because you see Canelo Alvarez in the past, it is true he had problems with fighters who could move. Great footwork, guys like Floyd Mayweather, Landy Lara. He's had difficulties in those fights. Now, the interesting thing about it, it wasn't simply that they could move is what caused Canelo Alvarez problems. It's the speed at which they move. So it wasn't just movement, it was also movement and speed. Both of those.
It wasn't just the speed and movement, also by Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Landy Lara, or Landy Lara, however you pronounce it. And Landy Lara, who, of course, or Landy Lara, who's been one of my favorite fighters to watch over the past several years. Same with Floyd Mayweather Jr. But of course, Floyd's been retired now for a while. But at the end of the day, both of those fighters are defensive wizards. Both of those fighters can really kind of be looked at within this generation as really, within that defensive wizard category. They're both extraordinarily fast, not only all in all with their feet and not only all in all with their defense, but their decision making, their anticipation. And really, when you take a look at some of their highlights and some of their breakdown videos, Landy Lara, even though a lot of people, unfortunately, within about probably 10 to 20 years' time, a lot of people may not remember who Landy Lara is. Landy Lara is going to be one of those people that at least I remember as one of those guys who is probably going to go down as one of the more underrated fighters of all time. Landy Lara is a person that was a genius defensively. He was a person that was an excellent counterpuncher. He, in my opinion, once again, out of those Cuban fighters that came out of that Cuban boxing school, which is known for a very excellent amateur pedigree program, and all those Cuban fighters are very extraordinarily dangerous. Out of any fighter, even including Guillermo Rigondeaux and Lara and Gamboa and whoever the hell else you want to compare him to, Luis Ortiz, I thought Lara was the most skilled out of any of those fighters. And Landy Lara in that fight against Canelo, he was able to give him hell. But Lara's been able to give everyone hell. It doesn't matter all in all who you were. He gave Jarrett Hurd hell. He got robbed against Paul Williams, in my view. He gave Austin Trout a hell of a time as well, coming off of that defeat to Canelo Alvarez. He completely embarrassed him. Landy Lara was able to give anyone and everyone hell in his career.
Guys were significantly faster than Canelo Alvarez. But Canelo Alvarez has already shown he's overcome that hurdle in his career by beating prime undefeated world champions like Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant by stoppage wins. And both of these guys were faster than Canelo Alvarez. Both of these guys.
I certainly all in all would agree with you to a degree. I think all in all that does prove that Canelo, that, he certainly has at least somewhat gotten over the hurdle of, the movement. Because Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, those are two fighters that have very quick feet. They have very decent footwork from what I remember. And all in all, they're very decent movers. Now, of course, they're not really remembered for their A-grade power. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to make this DMITRY BIVOL fight so interesting, because Bivol is going to be a step up in terms of power. Bivol is this dude's nothing to mess around with. Like I said, you got these certain channels that are trying to argue that, oh well, Canelo must have thought that Bivol was going to be the easier fight. No, Canelo Alvarez is trying to unify the 175-pound division because he wants to be in that top 10, top 5 discussion. That's what Canelo Alvarez is aiming for. So he's not really 100% worried about David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo right now. He's focusing on Beterbiev and Bivol. That's what he's focusing on. Now for the rest of the year after this fight, if he ends up winning the fight, he'll focus on Gennady Golovkin in the rematch, get that out of the way, or the third fight, and then he'll probably face Ilunga Makabu, which will even add more to his legacy if he's able to win, a championship belt, an official one in a 5th weight class. And then after that, next year he'll probably face Beterbiev for the complete undisputed titles at the 175-pound division.
Are much better movers than David Benavidez and DMITRY BIVOL. So the fact that he would pick those...
I'm not going to say that Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, in my view, were much better movers than what DMITRY BIVOL is. But what I will say is that Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders are great movers in their own right. If you're going to say all in all that you believe that Canelo may have a certain amount of problem with DMITRY BIVOL's movement, I wouldn't necessarily 100%, or what I will say is this, I somewhat see where you're coming from. But then when you bring up David Benavidez into argument, it just it confuses me a little bit, because I don't think David Benavidez is really that great of a mover. I mean, it's no offense, but there's certain Mexican fighters that I just see to where they kind of seem just like basic overall come forward fighters. David Benavidez seems like another one of those basic Mexican fighters to me. It just is what it is. Canelo is one of those all-time great talents. To be honest with you, at least during my lifetime, I've never seen a Mexican fighter as good as what he is. And I know a lot of people, sometimes they come on my channel and they're like, oh, you don't know anything about Morales and Barrera and Marquez. They were all more skilled than Canelo. Well, if they were truly all more skilled than Canelo, they would have won a lot of the bigger fights in their career. Because Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera, and Juan Manuel Marquez, they would not even be looked at as the second best of their generation, because they could not even beat the second greatest fighter of their generation, Manny Pacquiao. They lost overall the trilogies, or they lost overall the rematches. They lost almost every single fight in their career to Manny Pacquiao. So at the end of the day, don't give me this shit of, oh, well, all those fighters are more talented and skilled than Canelo Alvarez. No, they weren't. And that's why Marquez and Morales and Barrera, they can't be looked at as over Canelo Alvarez. It just can't happen. The only Mexican fighters, in my view, that deserve to be in the conversation with Canelo, when it comes down, at least at the current moment in time, are Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. and Salvador Sanchez. Those are the only ones. Now, Ricardo Lopez, I can't really tell you about because I don't really know much about him, so I'm not really going to put him in the conversation. But that's not me saying that maybe without a shadow of a doubt he doesn't deserve to be there. I just don't know a lot about his career. So it is what it is. But I know about Chavez Sr., I know about Sanchez. Anyway.
Guys based on movement simply doesn't make sense when Canelo Alvarez has already proven he can beat guys who move better than Benavidez and Bivol. It doesn't make any sense. Now, the logical...
Well, Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, in my opinion, they certainly overall move quicker than what a David Benavidez is going to be. Listen, that's not me saying that the matchup is still not going to be very interesting. But if your point is going to be that I think that Canelo is going to have difficulty with David Benavidez because of his movement, what movement are you talking about? David Benavidez has never exhibited, in my opinion, A-grade movement. It's never been there. He's never had A-grade head movement. He's never had A-grade defense. He's never overall had A-grade, I believe, head movement. He's never had any of that. Never had A-grade footwork. Never had A-grade head movement. Never had A-grade defense. Never. Never, never, never.
Reason would say if you were picking Benavidez or Bivol to beat Canelo would simply be because both of these guys are big, strong fighters, and if Canelo Alvarez cannot bully them and have his way, then he's in for a long night. That would make much more sense. And make no mistake, both...
Well, for DMITRY BIVOL, I think all in all that if Canelo is not able to handle his foot speed and also his power, when it comes down to it, it could very potentially be a very long night for Canelo Alvarez. But I believe, because of what I've seen out of Canelo Alvarez lately in the past several years, that more than likely Canelo Alvarez, he'll be able to adjust to it. You can tell that when you watch Canelo, he's an all-time great fighter. He's a person that, excuse me, in my view, all in all, is one of those all-time great fighters that very, 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 very rarely come around often, to where basically he can almost go to almost any weight class that he wants to and pretty much have his way with any of these fighters. That's why Canelo Alvarez, in my view, at least to a certain degree, he does have to be compared almost to the Manny Pacquiao Floyd Mayweather Jr. level. I'm not going to quite put him on that level as of yet, but it's almost getting there.
These fights are dangerous fights for Canelo Alvarez. DMITRY Bivol,
I agree.
especially. But the interesting thing is, Canelo Alvarez is the total package. He'll actually be the faster fighter than either one of these guys, Benavidez or Bivol. Both of these guys' defense do not compare to Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo Alvarez is not only the faster fighter than both of these guys, he has a higher IQ than both of these guys.
I would agree with that. I think that Canelo Alvarez certainly has the higher boxing IQ. I think that he probably has the better hand speed than both of them. Maybe DMITRY Bivol can compete with him in terms of hand speed, maybe. I don't think that David Benavidez is going to. David Benavidez, he's almost kind of like Amir Khan. A lot of people take a look at him and they're like, man, look at that hand speed. Look at how many combinations he throws. Yeah, but he gets hit so many times in return because a lot of the reason why he really looks so quick is because he doesn't really over a lot of the times throw punches as properly as what you would think. I'm not saying that he doesn't have power in his punches, so he must throw them somewhat properly, but it's kind of like Amir Khan. When Amir Khan throws a lot of his punches, he looks so quick, but a big part of the reason why that is because he has a very poor defense. A lot of the times, people will sacrifice their defense in order to have greater hand speed, so they don't put their hands up. They don't put one hand up while, throwing another punch or throwing a certain combination. So that's kind of what David Benavidez almost reminds me of, and that's why you've seen him get knocked down a couple times in his career, even against lower level competition. So it just is what it is. But anyways, I pretty much agreed with the majority of what the I.B.F.P had to say in this video. It's going to be very particularly interesting to see how Mr. Canelo Alvarez handles that at DMITRY Bivol, because I think that DMITRY Bivol is a fantastic fighter. I think that this truly is a colossal fight. I can't wait to see it. Hopefully, overall, if I do get to 1,000 subscribers, we'll see what happens, because I believe that is the amount that you need to talk about the fight. Hopefully, overall, I can actually broadcast at least my commentary live and tell you all to know what I scored the fight live. We'll see all know what happens there. But anyways, that'll be very interesting later on down the line. We'll see what happens. Just thought that I would commentate in this video. Thought that it was very particularly interesting. We'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Talk to you all later.